They say a man's land is his legacy, not because of the dirt or the fence lines, but because of what he's willing to do when someone tries to take it. I didn't ask for a fight. I didn't go looking for trouble. All I ever wanted was quiet mornings, a strong cup of coffee, and the sound of wind in the trees. But when strangers showed up in uniforms they didn't earn, waving badges they didn't deserve, and claiming power they never had, I realized something. There's a line. And once they cross it, you either stand your ground, or you lose everything that ever mattered. The air in Summit Creek, Wyoming, smelled like pine needles and stubborn peace. Up here, in the high country, it was easy to believe the rest of the world didn't exist. And for Caleb Rourke, that's exactly why he stayed. His cabin sat on 4 acres of wooded land his father had carved out decades ago. No neighbors within shouting distance. No HOA, no streetlights, no social calls. That's the way he liked it. That's the way he needed it. This morning was like any other. Coffee brewed in a chipped enamel pot. Blue jays chattered lazily outside. Caleb sat on the porch, legs stretched out, eyes half-lidded, letting the silence crawl into the cracks that grief had carved long ago. Then, the sound of tires on gravel. Caleb's head turned slowly. A black SUV matte finish, tinted windows rolled to a stop at the base of his long, winding driveway. Dust curled behind it like smoke from a fire not yet burning. 3 men stepped out. They were dressed in crisp, almost theatrical uniforms, black tactical vests, radios, steel-toed boots. The letters HOA Enforcement Unit were stitched across their chests in clean white thread, like parody costumes someone had ordered off the internet. Caleb stood, the tallest man, stocky with a shaved head and an unsettlingly calm smile, approached the gate. A thin, clipboard-toting man in aviators flanked him, while the third, silent, towering, and gloved remained near the SUV, scanning the tree line. "Morning," the bald one said, tapping the gate with a gloved knuckle. "You Caleb Rourke?" Caleb didn't move. "Depends on who's asking." "Name's Director Hayes, Silver Hollow Homeowners Association." He smiled wider, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You've been notified. You're in violation of community compliance codes." Caleb squinted. "There's no HOA in Summit Creek." "There is now." The man behind the clipboard stepped forward. "Effective 2 weeks ago, Summit Creek has been absorbed into the Silver Hollow Development Authority. Retroactive compliance is being enforced." Caleb blinked once. "Development Authority?" Hayes nodded. "Which includes enforcement and penalties." The clipboard man held up a packet of papers. "You've failed to comply with minimum standards. Landscaping irregularities, non-permitted exterior structures, unauthorized fencing, solar panels visible from public sightlines." Caleb's jaw tightened. "You passed 2 miles of forest to get here." "Public road," clipboard said flatly. Caleb stepped off the porch and approached the gate, never breaking eye contact. "You can turn that SUV around. You're not getting an inch of this land." Hayes exhaled slowly, like a patient father dealing with a stubborn child. "Sir, refusal to comply with enforcement protocol constitutes grounds for seizure proceedings under paragraph 4, subsection. Get off my land." Caleb's voice cut sharp and low. The third man reached towards something under his vest. A radio? A baton? Caleb's blood surged. "Easy," Hayes said, holding a hand up. "You've got 24 hours to review the documents. After that, we return." "And if I don't play along?" "Then," Hayes said, smiling just enough to chill the air, "we stop being neighbors." They turned and walked back to the SUV like nothing had happened. Caleb stood frozen, fists clenched. The stack of forged legalese crumpled beneath his boot. The SUV's engine growled and vanished into the pines, but the smell of false authority lingered like smoke. Inside, Caleb locked the door behind him and immediately dialed the county assessor's office. "No such HOA registered here," the clerk said after a moment. "Never has been. And Summit Creek isn't part of any development plan." Caleb thanked her and hung up, staring out the window, eyes scanning the trees. He'd seen predators before. These weren't scammers. These were wolves in uniforms. And they were organized. He powered on the old laptop his wife once used for mapping county soil, pulled open legal records, scanned land titles, jurisdiction boundaries, and the most recent district updates. Nothing. But the documents he'd been shown weren't amateur. They had official stamps, faked clerk signatures, and most chilling of all, his name, his property coordinates, and a demand to vacate within 72 hours. A line had been crossed, and Caleb Rourke had lost too much in life to let anyone take what was left. That night, as the wind rustled through the trees and coyotes yipped in the dark, Caleb sat on the porch in full silence, shotgun by the door, coffee gone cold, mind racing, and in his chest, an old fire rekindled. By morning, Caleb had printed every copy of the fake HOA documents the men had dropped off. He laid them across his kitchen table like puzzle pieces, reading, marking, comparing. His hands were steady, but his gut twisted with every detail. The header, Silver Hollow Homeowners Oversight Division, the seal, looked real. If you didn't know, Wyoming's county stamps hadn't changed since 1998. But Caleb did. He'd seen them in probate court years ago, when he fought for this very land after his father passed. He still remembered the curvature of the seal's eagle wings, the placement of the state motto, the font on the clerk's nameplate. This seal wasn't just fake. It was lazily forged, like someone thought no one would ever bother to check. But he did, and he knew exactly who would help him prove it. He left a voicemail on a burner number he hadn't used in years. "Emily, it's Caleb. I've got a mess. The kind you walk away from or burn down. I'd rather burn it. Call me." He didn't expect a call back, but she answered in under 10 minutes. Emily Carr had once been the youngest legal assistant to argue a housing code case before the state board. She'd won. Then she disappeared. Disbarred not for fraud, not for misconduct, but for whistleblowing. She exposed a backdoor deal between a major HOA conglomerate and a state official. Her case never made it past page 6 of any paper. Last Caleb heard, she was living in a trailer outside Glenwood Springs, growing succulents and hacking county zoning files for sport. He drove 2 hours to find her. She looked the same sharp eyes, chipped nail polish, half smile, like she never fully trusted the world. "Let me guess," she said, sipping coffee from a cracked Yellowstone mug. "They said your fence violates neighborhood aesthetics." Caleb handed her the paperwork. She read in silence, then snorted. "Jesus, they're getting sloppy." "You've seen this before?" "I've seen versions of it, but not like this." She tapped the paper. "This signature here? The judge who supposedly signed this, he died 2 years ago. Brain aneurysm. I wrote a brief for his estate. And this seal," she held it up to the window, let sunlight hit it. "This was lifted from a 2013 HOA newsletter and altered in Photoshop. Barely." Caleb's jaw tensed. "So it's all fake." Emily leaned back, arms crossed. "Not just fake. Weaponized." They dug deeper. By sundown, they'd tracked the Silver Hollow HOA through 5 shell company registrations, each dissolved after less than 9 months of activity, each linked to rural properties across 3 states. Every time, the story was the same. Isolated homeowner, sudden HOA enforcement, fake violation notices, property seizure or coerced sale. In some cases, owners disappeared. In others, local law enforcement was conveniently absent. "It's a scam," Caleb said quietly. "A coordinated one," Emily nodded. "With legal polish. These guys aren't amateurs. They know the law just well enough to corrupt it." "Can we stop them?" Her eyes met his. "That depends. You ready to risk becoming their next target?" Caleb didn't blink. "They already knocked on my door." As dusk settled over Glenwood, Emily opened an encrypted laptop and began writing an affidavit. She pulled satellite maps, dated zoning files, and scraped metadata from the forged documents. "Here's what we'll do," she said. "We don't go to the county. We go above them. We prepare a package, full report, real-time documentation. Then, we drop it to 3 places at once: State Legal Board, a journalist I trust, and the Bar Association. Caleb nodded, eyes steady. Then, she added, we wait for them to come back. Because they will. He looked out the window, toward the mountains. The wind was shifting again. It carried weight now. Next time, Caleb said, voice low, we're ready. 3 days later, they returned. Not just the same SUV, now there were 2. 2 vehicles, 6 men, and a flatbed trailer with a bulldozer chained to it. Caleb spotted them just as the dust plume curled over the hill. He'd been stacking wood behind the shed, but the moment he heard that unmistakable diesel growl, he grabbed the handheld radio from his hip. They're here, he said into the mic. Emily's voice came through half a second later. Copy. Cameras rolling. They had a system now. 3 motion-activated trail cams set across the perimeter, plus a solar-charged drone Emily had reprogrammed for 24-hour surveillance. Caleb didn't know how she made it all work with a 10-year-old laptop and half a satellite dish. But it worked. He stepped out from behind the shed and met the convoy at the tree line, rifle slung over his shoulder. Stance, calm but ready. Hayes was back, his grin even wider this time. He had a fresh uniform, darker sunglasses, and a lanyard badge that read Executive Authority, Code 4 Enforcement. The audacity would have been comical if it wasn't so dangerous. Morning, Mr. Rourke, Hayes called. Beautiful day for compliance. Caleb didn't answer. His eyes scanned the new faces. These weren't workers. They were muscle unlabeled tactical gear. Earpieces, sidearms that didn't look fake. Hayes gestured at the bulldozer. We'll be starting on the driveway and fence line, per our default clause under Enforcement Article 9. Caleb's hand rested lightly on his belt. I warned you, he said evenly. This land isn't governed by your made-up rules. Hayes took a step forward. You're in possession of unpermitted infrastructure that obstructs communal development. That makes you a threat to our jurisdiction. And what jurisdiction is that exactly? Emily's voice rang out from the porch. Every head turned. She stepped forward, tablet in hand, fingers tapping across the screen. Because according to the Wyoming State Registry, she said, holding the tablet up, your HOA doesn't exist. Your articles of incorporation were filed under a dead LLC in New Mexico, and your enforcement team, not bonded, not registered, not real. One of the men flinched. A second glance toward the SUV. Hayes didn't blink. He smiled wider. Oh, you brought your lawyer, he sneered. How quaint. Not your lawyer, Emily said. Just someone who knows a fake notary stamp when she sees one. She pressed a button. From speakers hidden beneath the porch, Hayes's voice from 3 days prior echoed through the air. You don't live under HOA rules. You live under our radar. There was a moment of silence. Then Hayes turned toward his men. Proceed, he ordered. One of them moved toward the bulldozer. And that was the line. Caleb stepped forward, raised his hand, not to threaten, but to signal. The drone zipped overhead, low enough to be heard. Red lights blinked from the trees. The sound of a second truck approaching from behind startled even Hayes. From the rear road, Emily's contact, Deputy Marshal Len McGowan, pulled up in a marked cruiser. He stepped out, hand resting on his holster, wide-brimmed hat cocked low. Well now, he said, voice slow and iron-flat. I do believe you boys are trespassing. Hayes opened his mouth, then paused. McGowan continued, walking toward the front of the SUV. This vehicle's unregistered, no state plates, no HOA identification that matches our state registry. So unless you can present legal authority, I'm going to ask you to shut that engine down and leave the premises. Hayes glanced at Caleb, then at Emily. His mask cracked for half a second. Then he smiled again. This isn't over, he said. He raised a hand. His men paused. Then, without another word, they filed back into the vehicles. Engines rumbled. The bulldozer backed down the hill. Within 2 minutes, they were gone. Emily let out a slow breath. You think they'll stop now? No, Caleb said, but they blinked first. McGowan turned to them. I'll file the report, but if you want this to stick, really stick, we'll need more than footage and fake badges. We'll need intent, pattern, threat. We've got that, Emily said. You just gave us time. That night, Caleb found himself staring at the split in his driveway where the bulldozer had nudged before reversing. It was barely a mark, maybe a foot of crushed gravel, but it was a symbol, a crack in the surface, a warning. And now he knew. If these men could forge the law, they could force people to follow it. Fear was their weapon. Uniforms were their cover, and they'd be back with better lies, or worse force. But next time, Summit Creek would be ready. For the first time in weeks, Caleb couldn't sleep. Not because of fear, because of possibility. Something about the way Hayes had backed down the calmness in his retreat had struck a nerve. It hadn't been panic. It wasn't even frustration. It was strategy. As if retreat had been part of the plan all along. He told Emily as much over breakfast the next morning. She stirred instant coffee into a chipped mug and stared across the table. That's what bothers me too, she admitted. Guys like that don't lose sleep over one sheriff. They regroup, restructure. Caleb exhaled slowly. So what do we do? Emily tapped her pen on the table. We follow the money. By noon, they had pulled up LLC registrations from 5 states: Wyoming, Colorado, Montana, Idaho, and Utah. Each had a nearly identical paper trail, a dissolved HOA, a vague community improvement group, a sudden reappearance as an enforcement-based subdivision authority. Bums. Then, radio silence. Here, Emily said, spinning her laptop around. See this address? It was listed as the headquarters for a company called Altura Civic Management, supposedly the parent company of Silver Hollow HOA. It's a UPS store in Pocatello, she added dryly. She kept digging. Within the metadata of a document Hayes had left behind, she found an embedded edit signature. CRG Holdings, Division 7. She froze. Caleb leaned in. What is it? CRG. That's not an HOA. That's a private asset management firm. They specialize in reclaiming distressed land for redevelopment. They do it through third parties, shell HOAs usually. And this Division 7? Emily's voice dropped. I think it's their enforcement arm. That night, they drove to meet one of Emily's old law school contacts, Elena Navarro, a journalist turned legal researcher, now working for a watchdog nonprofit in Fort Collins. They met in a parking lot behind a diner, under sodium lights. Elena handed Emily a thumb drive. You didn't get this from me, she said. But if you want to know how big this gets, start here. Inside the drive, internal emails, invoices, even voice memos pulled from CRG's leaked backend. One line chilled Caleb more than any threat Hayes had made. Summit Creek is greenlit. Property viability is high. Resistance expected minimal. Proceed under Phase 3 authority. Emily blinked. They planned for this. Caleb's hands curled into fists. They picked us because we're small. Because no one would notice. She looked up at him. What are you thinking? I'm thinking, Caleb said, his voice low and steady. We make them wish they picked the wrong town. Emily got to work. She contacted 3 other towns that had been listed in the data files, a fishing village in Idaho, a farming patch near Butte, and a remote suburb outside Moab. In each case, she found residents who had received similar violation notices. Some had already left. Some had sold for pennies. One woman hadn't been heard from in weeks. Caleb couldn't forget that line. Resistance expected minimal. They were betting on silence, betting on fear, and it had worked until now. Later that night, as they sat in the cabin's living room, Caleb reviewed the footage from the drone one more time. On a hunch, he paused during Hayes' arrival and zoomed in on the dashboard of the second SUV. A clipboard, a stack of maps, A file folder. One corner of a document had been exposed, barely visible. A circle, a star, a date. Emily leaned over. Zoom in. They enhanced it. The star was centered over Redvale, Nevada, a small town population under 900. The date? 2 weeks from now. Caleb stared at it. They're moving, Emily nodded. And this time, we know where. She looked at him. We can warn them. Redvale maybe even get ahead of it. We could, Caleb said, but this thing runs deeper than one town. Then we bring it into the light. The town of Redvale, Nevada, looked like it had stopped growing sometime in the 80s and was perfectly fine with that. 2 stoplights, 1 post office, and a diner with handwritten specials on the window. Most homes still had rotary mailboxes. Everything about the place screamed forgotten. And maybe that's why CRG had chosen it. Caleb and Emily arrived under the guise of traveling contractors. Emily wore dark glasses and a blazer. Caleb had shaved and donned a work vest with a forged Western Utilities survey patch. They weren't here to intimidate. They were here to warn. Their first stop, Maggie Turner, a retired librarian who'd posted in a local forum about new HOA rules popping up without a vote. Her hands trembled as she poured them tea in her dusty sunroom. The letter she showed them was nearly identical to what Caleb had received. Stamped, signed, sealed with fake legal threats dressed up like real policy. They said my garden gnome violated visual integrity standards, Maggie muttered, blinking through thick glasses. I've had that gnome for 20 years. Caleb nodded, quiet fury building in his chest. They told me I had to pay a $950 fee, or they'd file a lien, she added. But we don't have an HOA. I would know. My late husband chaired the town council for 10 years. Emily pulled out a portable scanner and digitized the document. Did they say when they'd come back? She asked. Maggie hesitated. They said next Thursday with the papers. Caleb and Emily shared a look. That gave them 4 days. They moved fast. Emily spent the next 48 hours contacting everyone on the town's property. Roll those who had received violation letters, and those who hadn't yet. She walked door to door with Caleb, speaking to farmers, veterans, single parents, all confused by the sudden appearance of new rules. One man had already paid a $400 fee by money order. Another had pulled down his American flag after being told it violated neutral FAD regulation. But by the end of day 3, they'd built a list of 27 properties targeted for forced compliance, and they had a plan. On the morning of the 4th day, Caleb stood in the center of the town square, speaking to a group of 50 residents beneath the war memorial. He didn't yell, he didn't use a microphone. He just told the truth. You're not in violation, he said. You're being hunted, quietly, systematically, by people who think you'll be too scared or too polite to ask questions. He paused, then held up a printout from the CRG Holdings memo. They've done this to towns just like yours. They'll show up in clean cars wearing clean uniforms, waving fake legal threats, and they'll try to make you feel like you have no choice. He met their eyes. But you do. Emily stepped up beside him. We've sent all documentation to the Nevada State Attorney's Office. We've looped in federal contacts. If we can stall them, get them to act rashly, we can catch them on federal wire fraud, impersonation, and extortion. The crowd stirred. An old man in a flannel shirt raised a hand. But what if they bring guns? We're not asking you to fight them, Caleb said. Just don't sign anything. Don't pay $1 and let the cameras roll. He gestured to the rooftops. Emily had installed 6 wireless solar cameras overnight, courtesy of Lucas Ung, a coder friend of hers who owed her a favor. Let them bury themselves, Emily said. That's all we need. And bury themselves they did. The next morning, right on cue, 2 SUVs rolled into Redvale. Same pattern, same uniforms, new faces. They split into teams, walking up to porches, issuing envelopes, snapping photos of violations. But this time, people didn't cower. They recorded. They questioned. They refused. Maggie Turner stood on her porch with her gnome in hand and told them to get off her property, or she'd shove that violation up someone's jurisdiction. By noon, the footage was already online. Emily edited it in real time, overlaying legal commentary and CRG's internal documents. She uploaded the video to 4 whistleblower channels, 2 federal legal watchdog sites, and sent a copy to Elena Navarro, who forwarded it to major outlets under embargo. By 3:45 p.m., it hit 1.2 million views. By 6:00 p.m., CRG Holdings' site went offline. By nightfall, a federal cease and desist order was issued to every known entity linked to the fake HOA groups. But as Redvale celebrated in the diner with fresh pie and cheap champagne, Caleb wasn't smiling. He stood outside beneath the flickering neon open sign, watching a black SUV parked down the block. The engine idled. The windows were too dark to see through. Emily joined him. "They won't stop," Caleb said quietly. "This was just one cell." "I know," she replied, "but today we bought time for Redvale. And maybe the next town." Caleb nodded, jaw clenched. They both watched as the SUV slowly pulled away and disappeared into the desert night. 3 weeks after Redvale pushed back, the subpoenas came. Thick manila envelopes, stamped with the seal of the U.S. Department of Justice. Names were listed: CRG Holdings, Silver Hollow HOA, Altura Civic Management. 32 shell corporations dissolved overnight. 8 individuals arrested across 4 states. 2 of them, Hayes and the clipboard man from Summit Creek, were caught trying to flee into Canada with over $200,000 in prepaid cards. Their charges: federal wire fraud, racketeering, impersonation of law enforcement, criminal trespass, conspiracy to defraud landowners. It made the front page of 3 major newspapers and earned a 2-minute segment on national evening news. But for Caleb and Emily, it didn't feel like a win. It felt like cleanup. They returned to Summit Creek on a cold afternoon. The pines had begun to brown with early frost, and Caleb's cabin looked more worn than he remembered. Maybe it was just his eyes. Maybe it was what he knew now. Emily stood by the fence, watching 2 local workers finish repairing the crushed gravel from the last time Hayes had rolled in with a bulldozer. "You ever think," she asked, "what would have happened if you'd just paid the fine and let it go?" Caleb looked at her. Every day. He meant it. He thought about Maggie Turner, about the man in Idaho who sold his family farm, about the single mother in Utah who disappeared after being threatened by Code 7 enforcement. And he thought about his wife. How much easier it would have been if someone had stood up for her when they came after their home. He clenched his jaw. "That's why I didn't." Later that week, they were invited to a summit in Cheyenne, hosted by a bipartisan legal coalition focused on property rights abuse. They declined. Instead, Caleb wrote a letter. He posted it online, just once, with no hashtags and no contact info. It went viral anyway. "We were never fighting a law. We were fighting the illusion of one. And illusions only work if no one speaks. So speak, even if your voice shakes." By now, 8 other towns had come forward. With Emily's help, 4 class action lawsuits were filed. Pro bono lawyers picked up the rest. Elena Navarro, the journalist, wrote a long-form investigative piece that got picked up by Rolling Stone. The title? The HOA That Never Was. It shook up the real estate industry. Lawmakers started talking. Quietly, of course. And still, Caleb stayed quiet. He went back to working his land, cutting wood, watching the seasons roll in without asking permission. But there was something different now. One day, a pickup truck pulled into his drive. A teenage boy stepped out, awkward, fidgeting, holding a clipboard with a school logo. "You're Mr. Rourke, right?" he asked. "We're doing a civics project on community rights. My teacher said you might talk to us." Caleb didn't say yes, but he didn't say no either. That night, Emily found him on the porch, a fire crackling low beside them. "Summit Creek's a hell of a place," she said. He nodded, slow. "It is now."